Hey folks, how's it going? Coach Patrick here, Endurance Nation, upstairs in the old office, suffering in the heat, which is apropos because that's what I'll be talking to you about today. This is our 15 minutes with me, Coach Patrick, an opportunity for me to connect with you about a topic that's near and dear to the heart of our teammates. Part of our mission here inside Endurance Nation is to educate athletes to becoming as self-coached as possible. We want you to be able to make really smart and empowered decisions relative to your training and racing so you can have the best possible experience out there. And we do that inside the team through collaboration in terms of education, in terms of workshops, in terms of training, obviously supporting one another at races and so on. So it all happens inside the team. You can check us out at endurancenation.us. This week, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about heat and how that the habits are related to heat as athletes. So I've talked to you before and in previous episodes. If you go back here on the Facebook channel, or for those of you inside the team, go back in the archives, you'll see some previous conversations I've had with you related to habits and things that we can do to make positive changes to habits, little adaptations, small changes that actually add up to have a bigger effect on your overall outcomes, right? Habits are key levers. People think about, for example, let me just give you like a quick rundown. People will say, Coach, I ran a 4-hour marathon and I want to break 4 hours. I've got to get under that 4-hour mark. What do I need to do? We do all this analysis and we found lots of different areas where people can focus on. In this case, let's say this athlete just simply is not recovering enough. Their easy days are simply not easy enough. We need to come up with a habit that is going to allow this athlete to recover more quickly. Well, we can do habits in very simple ways. We can do habits around nutrition in terms of like those post-hard workouts. We can mitigate the cost of those hard workouts, better recovery protocols, right? We can improve sleep quality on those rest days, right? So we can do a better job of going to bed or optimizing sleep through some key habits as well. And these are things that are just lifestyle changes. Once you make them and you have better sleep, it's kind of hard to go back. It's like learning how to ride a bicycle. We don't unlearn it intentionally. And so when we have that built in, we use it going forward. The same thing applies in this case when we're talking about heat management. I wanted to share with you today some of the research that Stacy Sims had recently published. I'm a huge fan of Stacy Sims, and if you're not following her on Facebook or on her podcast, you are definitely missing out, not just for female athletes, but for all athletes. Her intuitive, athlete-centric approach to managing data and helping you make better decisions is not only in alignment with how we operate inside Endurance Nation, but makes my job as a coach super easy because I can say, see, here's this really incredibly smart person who says the same thing. Look at all this data. Look at this research, not just born out of experience, not just born out of the stories of your teammates and what we've learned over time, but also backed by science. All right. So let's head on over to my shared screen here and we can kind of pull up the slides. I'm going to have these slides available for you and I'll go through and talk through them. Of course, this will be recorded and you can come back and access it anytime. If you've got questions, comments, or feedback, put them in the comments next to the box here. I'll see them. I'll answer them live as best I can. Otherwise, put them in the comments after the show's over. If you're watching the recording, I'll come back and check it out later. All right. Be sure to tag me as Patrick McCran so I'll find it. All right. Awesome. Very cool. So this first chart, I just want to show you, covers some of the key elements around heat adaptation. When we think about training and dealing with the heat, a huge part of it as an athlete is finding a way to not only get our training accomplished in the heat, but to also use that heat stress as a point of leverage, right? So not just a weakness, something we have to accommodate, but perhaps something that we can use to our advantage strategically to build more fitness or perhaps even to outperform the competition on the race day. So really important to think about it. This isn't just, we're not just solving problems. Every solved problem is an opportunity for you to excel, whether it's personally in terms of your training or also externally in racing as well. All right, awesome. So in this chart, as you'll see here, and those of you listening to the podcast, you're just going to have to take a look at the image that we put here on the header so you can see it. This chart shows a couple different things. We've got adaptation in terms of percentages, the relative percentage, right, and where we're at. And then you also have days of acclimation moving across that horizontal axis as well. So we go from 0 days of acclimation on the very left all the way up to 14 days of acclimation as well. And the markers we're looking at here are things like plasma volume in blue, heart rate in red, exercise capacity, thermal comfort, skin temperature, core temperature in green, which is a real critical one, and then sweat rate as well. How do things adapt over time? How do they evolve? And what we find is that basically different athletes respond in different ways. And this is just sort of a macro level graphic, so you get a sense of what we're talking about. But in general, you can see here that between, I would say, just about 6 to 9 days is kind of that window for optimal adaptation in terms of how we're dealing with the heat. And so we've got this window of time in terms of heat acclimation that we know is optimal based on the science. So how do we use that to our advantage? And that's the great question, right? All right, so things to think about for us, really, really healthy. So from a habit perspective, this is how we're going to go about doing it. First, we have to adapt to heat slowly. It's not a process. If you've ever gone on vacation to a hot destination, and by that, what I'm really trying to capture here is you got off an air-conditioned plane and walked out of an air-conditioned airport into a really hot environment. Or perhaps you left your luxuriously air-conditioned house and stepped outside for a workout, and you're just hit by that wall of heat. That's what rapid acclimation feels like. The body instantly kicks in and says, oh my goodness, how am I going to deal with this? That is not the optimal way for us to adapt over time to heat. Instead, we need some habits, right? So we have to adapt to heat slowly, which is why it's optimal for us to use habits to make it work, okay? Secondly, in terms of implementing these habits, we want to have this acclimation happen outside of the taper window. So whatever your personal optimal taper might be, it could be 2 weeks, could be 10 days, could be 3 days, depending on the duration of your race, your goals, your current fitness, all those different variables. We want to have the heat acclimation happen before we get to the taper. Heat acclimation in and of itself is stress on your body, right? It's already introducing a new stress in the system. If we are trying to taper, recover, get restored for the race, but you're also introducing this additional stress, your body's getting these mixed signals. It's not going to be primed to be successful on race day. Of course, if you leave this acclimation piece to the last minute, or you're racing this weekend and it's going to be hot and you see this on Wednesday and you're freaking out, reach out to me on the socials. I'll be happy to help you out. But in the short term, understand that this compressed version of heat acclimation during the taper is not recommended. All right. And then the third part for us is understanding that we are not going to combine intensity with our training with heat adaptation. And this is really important as well. People basically connect racing with intensity, right? So there's discomfort, there's stress that goes with racing, regardless of the distance, regardless of the pace. We have this focus around work, and we want to be ready for that work on race day. So we train at that work rate. Part of our preparation period inside Endurance Nation is having you do race pace work in your training. That's great. But if we suddenly start to introduce heat as part of a heat adaptation process, and we have that training stress, the overlap of the two is too great early on. What we need is this adaptation window for our body to adjust, like we saw in that first table, that adaptation window for our body to adjust before we can resume our regular higher intensity race specific workload. Okay, so these are things that we need to think about from a perspective. So we want to adapt slowly. So we need habits that start easy and allow us to acclimate over time. We want to avoid the stress of heat adaptation and taper. So our habits have to start earlier. I would recommend probably about 6 weeks out from your race to start the process of adaptation or start thinking about it or optimizing for heat adaptation. And then obviously avoiding intensity at that time allows us to kind of span those pieces out. Okay. An important distinction here that Stacy, Dr. Sims, I should say, has really brought to light is the differences between men and women in terms of heat adaptation. And I want to highlight them here as well, because often we're giving blanket advice, and I think it's worth differentiating here in this point. For males, short-term acclimation looks like 4 to 5 days. Sauna heat exposure immediately following training is the easiest way to go. So that means, for me, it would mean going to the pool, doing a swim at my local YMCA. There's one particular one that has a really retro old sauna. I can go there, I can swim, and then get in the sauna, do my sauna protocol, no cold beverages in there, just after exercise, give my body time to adapt, starting from like 20 minutes, working up to 30, perhaps even 40 minutes of that process, and having my body sweat out after my workout as that additional stressor, which allows to short-term adaptation. So if I have a race this weekend, this is something I could start as late as a Monday if I had to do it, but not optimal as well. Ideally, we're doing exercise-based acclimation, which I'll get to in a second. All right, awesome. For the women, it's a little different, and it's important to note this. Women need roughly 9 days, almost double what the men need in terms of acclimation processes. And that was borne out by a study. I've got it linked here for you, but this is really important. So, if you and your significant other decide to do this heat acclimation thing together, you as a female will need to start a week earlier, right? Start going on this Monday, and your significant other goes on the next Monday, or your best friend or whatever, right? So we need to space this out so we have the appropriate time for acclimation. This response rate is also consistent with training adaptations as well for the heat. So if you're looking to acclimate with training, women, females, you need to start earlier in that process of being more intentional about it than the men do. It's just a function of the data that we have available to us now. And so we do need to start earlier and start to optimize this for our work. Okay, so super important. All right. And another note here that I didn't capture here in a slide, but I do want to point out is that women, depending on their cycle, also have different responses hormonally. And in some cases, when they're low hormone, they'll need more time, but high hormone athletes actually will need less time to adapt. So depending on where you fall in terms of your cycle as well, there's some nuances too. So you definitely want to check out Dr. Sims' podcast on the heat, and I'll do my best to find that link and put it here inside the show notes. You can go over there and check it out so you know. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some of these habits. First, we'll think about habits as rules. First and foremost, we're going to avoid high intensity and heat. So if we are going to be training in the heat, for a bike ride or for a run or for a swim or whatever it is that you're training for, you need to avoid that high intensity. So if I had a zone 2 workout, long ride available to me on the weekend, like that was my plan and that's what I wanted to do, I'm all excited about it. I want to get out there and I want to do work, and that's really important for me. But at the same time, doing that high zone 2 type work and then also incorporating the heat will be too much for my body. And I will be unsuccessful in terms of my workout because the stress will be too high. It's going to impact downstream workouts. That's not going to be great for me, and I'll be suffering as a result. So what I'm really thinking about is saying, how do I modify my workout to be successful? If I'm introducing the heat, I'm going to bring that intensity way down, especially in those early days when I'm just starting this process, okay? Number 2, I need to have a positive habit in place to practice my nutrition protocols. Being successful in the heat also means changing how you fuel to accommodate the heat. Our sweat rate goes up. We're going to need more fluids, but we can't just double everything. You double everything, you're going to have double the calories. Let's say you only need 200 calories an hour. And you have a bottle with 200 calories thanks to your handy dandy sports drink. But now in a hot weather, you need 2 bottles. Now you've got 400 calories. We don't want 400 calories. We only need 200 calories. We just need 48 ounces of fluids. You're going to have to do the math on this to make sure that you get it right. Power user tip, Endurance Nation athletes will often be very strategic about how they handle this, and they'll go ahead and make a feed bottle with concentrated drink mix in it, and then dilute that in water over the course of the ride in their BTA front bottle between the aero bars. And use that as a strategic method for making sure they get the right amount of concentration in, but are still taking in all the fluids that they need as well. You could do this as a runner at aid stations by having a bottle with concentrated drink in it and then diluting that in the water as you got there, or alternating concentrated drink in a bottle and then water in your Camelback as well. It's something you want to practice for sure, but very helpful. So these nutrition protocols are critical because even if you reduce the intensity, but you're in the heat and you don't accommodate things with the nutrition, you're going to run into a tough spot. It's going to impact your recovery, your ability to move forward. You're going to miss out on an opportunity for you to test that nutrition protocol. So don't miss out. We only have a couple of these long sessions in the heat where we can really focus. So we want to get them right. Okay. And the third part here is optimize, both use and optimize our race gear and our race pacing. Cannot say this enough. Training for a race, for example, let's say you're a triathlete training for an Ironman that's going to be in the heat, or for a gravel or long endurance mountain bike race, and you wear your favorite jersey. It's got like 17 pockets. You love it. You're out there, got a huge Camelback on. Life is good. But on race day, you're planning to go ultra light, like skin suit, like Mark Cavendish. You're going to have the super tiny Camelback as well. All of a sudden, all those pockets are gone. All the stuff that you practiced with, not apparently accessible on race day because you just don't have them on your kit. The 3 places you put those bottles of the extra food, they're not there anymore. So we want to use our race gear as much as possible for these heat acclimation workouts so we can do naturally the solutions that will help us to be successful in the heat with the resources that we will have on race day. Right? So it doesn't make sense for you to actually go out and train with a massive cooler full of Gatorade and cold drinks towing behind you. You're not going to have that on race day. How are you going to handle it? And then we structure our training accordingly. Similarly, our training zones will need to mimic what we plan on doing on race day. But of course, keeping in mind, rule number 1, that we drop that intensity down as we're going through that acclimation process to make sure that we're in a good spot. Okay, awesome. Next piece here. What are some workouts that we can follow, workout habits that you can implement part of this adaptation process? Again, you're starting a little earlier, 4 to 6 weeks out from your race. If you start that early, then you can do this sort of every other day. You don't have to cram it in every day. So you can have days where you do hard workouts in normal weather, and days where you do easy workouts where you've reduced the intensity so you can make sure that you're getting an adaptation piece in as well. So the more bandwidth that you have, the more benefit you'll get out of it. In this case, we have our adaptation. So one easy one, indoor cycling. That's super easy. Just make sure you have no fans. Even in cooler areas without fans, that room will definitely heat up. Oops, sorry about that. That room will definitely heat up. And as a result, will put you in a position where you definitely will need an opportunity to kind of stress the system and get some adaptations out of it. That's like an easy win for you. And so indoor cycling, no fan, zone 1. Do not mess this up by going too hard. Keep it in zone 1. Okay, just let the duration go out. Right. Light fluids during that time. This is an adaptation workout. Keep the consistency up, and then we can recover afterwards. Number 2, we have what another option might be if you're a runner or someone who's going to be outside and on your feet, is doing afternoon workouts, right? So you can say, instead of running in the morning when it's super cool, you can wait till later and do your runs in the afternoon, sometime between, say, 3 and 5 p.m. Typically falls into the heat of the day. And that's an opportunity for us to be able to, get the adaptations out into the open and do it through exercise, get the experience of what it means to be dealing with that higher heat and that higher pressure on our bodies, and do so in a way that's not only ergonomic, but also pretty effective for you in terms of lessons learned and so on. So that's an easy one. So opt those workouts in there. Or if it's on the weekend for either one of these sessions, you can opt for them that way as well. And you can say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and put in there my bike workout for this particular weekend. I'm going to push it back a little bit so I get extended time in that heat versus just all of it being in the cooler weather, right? Intentionally using that heat to our advantage. Another option, of course, which you sort of touched on earlier, is that post-workout sauna routine. That habit becomes harder because not everyone has a sauna, but it is something you can take advantage of if you do, even in one of the infrared saunas, or if you're going to leverage one that's perhaps at a gym, like I mentioned earlier, then you'll want to do your workout and just time it such that you'll end up in close proximity to the sauna to get in there after your workout and do that acclimation process, no fluids inside the sauna, building that extended time from 20 up to 40 minutes over time. My secret user power tip for the sauna, I wear my AirPods inside the sauna, my Bluetooth headphones, but I have my phone outside. My phone has a timer on it for how long I want to be in there, and then I can listen to my podcast or whatever I want to do while I'm inside the sauna, but I don't want my devices in there as well. Also, just kind of lets me get a little zen in the sauna and gives me a little privacy as well, which can be super helpful for you. Okay, so those are the key elements that I wanted to talk about today in terms of heat adaptation and habits around heat adaptation. At the end of the day, when we think about being successful as athletes and when we're dealing with the heat, a huge part of it is saying, how much time do I have? The more time that you have at your disposal, the more adaptation you can successfully achieve. If we need to do it rapidly, there's options for it, but in ideal settings, we have more time. We can start to prioritize our training. We can tweak some of our habits to move our workouts later. We can tweak our nutrition habits to accommodate additional stress on our bodies from the heat and the cost of doing our work. And over time, we'll not only see that adaptation, whether it's on the shorter side for the men out there or the longer side for women out there, for males and females. You have an opportunity to kind of observe that progression and see how it goes. Even those of you who are not perhaps training for a hot race know the difference between a run in March, a 10K run in March, and a 10K run in July. It's just hotter. And honestly, as we get through summer, it never gets easier, but your body gets more efficient at it. And honestly, this is one of the reasons why fall races, fall marathons are so great. Simply because athletes come out of the heat, getting closer and closer to race performance, but also managing the heat. And then as the heat drops away, their ability to run at that intensity remains. And aerobically, they're super fit coming out of it into the fall. One of the reasons why fall racing can be super beneficial for athletes who have traditionally hot summers. So for someone who's doing an Ironman, or doing the 70.3 or Ironman World Championships, having that race in October sounds awful, but it's actually perfect timing to come out of the summer with some heat adaptation, maintain that through September and early October, and then do your race as sort of an optimal place to be. All right. Thanks so much for tuning in for this coach lesson. I do this every Wednesday at 12 o'clock. You can watch the archives here on Facebook. You can head over to endurancenation.us if you want to access our expertise with our training plans in our community. We'd be happy to help you out and help you train for whatever it may be, whether it's the Tahoe Trail 100 mountain bike race, whether you're doing unbound gravel, you're doing an Ironman or your first triathlon. We have athletes competing in all different levels at all different abilities at events across the world. We'd be happy to help you out. Thanks so much for tuning in. I look forward to talking with you next week. Take it easy.